I'm not starting over, by the way. See, this always happens to me. No, it's okay. No worries. But in the New Saints, I wanted to offer a retelling, a reshaping of the Bodhisattva tradition that includes all of us, right? That the Bodhisattva has to be, in this time, a new saint, right? And what a new saint is, and has always been for me, is someone deeply concerned with justice, deeply concerned with the suffering of people, of communities, deeply concerned with how to dream into a new future, right? Where we all have access to the resources that we need to be well, right? For me, queerness and my expression of queerness is really about how do I work to make sure everyone has the experience or have a right to be free. You know, like everyone has a right to be safe, to be resourced, to be happy, to belong to communities, to have the freedom and the agency to choose the course of their lives and how to be happy and how to create community, right? To recognize that everyone else has that same right, but also to get clear about the fact that though we have a right to choose how we want to be free, we have to be careful about the ways in which we dominate other groups or force other groups into our ways of thinking, our ways of being, you know, that everyone has the space to be free, as long as your choices to be free do not create violence for me. You know, I think harm and discomfort are two different things. You know, I think we're living in a time where people's discomfort is confused as harm, you know, and that is used to justify, discomfort is used to justify harm against the vulnerable, marginalized communities, right? And for me, queerness is about disrupting that harm, right? And liberating all of us from these systems and institutions of violence and dominance. But mostly, you know, the New Saints, this book is really about spiritual abolition, right? You know, because I want to bring about a new world, a free world, you know, a world that's based upon loving and resting, right? Where we are able to choose our labor, right? Not forced into labor, but to choose the labor that is aligned with what is most important for us to do in the world to benefit others. Queerness has to be this project of abolition, right? We have to, as we work to get free, to create space, you know, for us to practice freedom, we also have to be concerned with so many other communities around the world who are struggling for their freedom, their independence. You know, we have to be concerned with members of our own community who are still in their countries and communities struggling to be seen, to be safe, right? To have the resources that they need to be well. And for me, queerness and Dharma are, I think Dharma is queer, first of all, right? And before I continue, you know, I want to tell the story to get more into the book, but I wanted to just, as part of my kind of practice and ritual, I like to light candles. And for me, the light represents the Dharma itself, clarity, openness, fluidity, right? The Dharma represents pleasure, right? The Dharma represents my choice to be my most authentic self. Because when I am practicing my most authentic self, I am also reducing harm and violence against myself and others around me. You know, I think sometimes the people who create the most harm for themselves and others are people who themselves are afraid to really be themselves, you know, for many different reasons. And I think that there's so much violence against our community because we're one of these communities, where we're choosing to live authentically and openly. We're choosing to be out and proud, right? And that scares people. That scares people because they begin to realize that they're not living as freely as they think they are, right? And instead of doing the work to free themselves from the ways in which systems and institutions have rigidly conditioned them, they would rather somehow erase us, so they can forget that there is actually a path of freedom and liberation that they can choose, right? And so early on, I realized that there was nothing wrong with me. It was something wrong with the world, something wrong with the rigidity of the world, the violence of the world, the systems of patriarchy and so forth that really worked really hard to police and limit my expression, especially in Dharma communities, right? And that I had a right, on behalf of all the people who needed to see me, I had a right to embody who and what I was, right? To become a queer Black mama whom no one has ever seen before. I've never seen a queer Black mama, except my reflection in the Zoom camera. I'm looking at the Black queer mama right now. But, I know that I needed to become something that no one's ever seen, which is just myself. And I hope that me being in the world really deeply inspires people to practice Dharma and to realize that Dharma is for them no matter who they are. So I like this candle. And as I like this candle, I also like this for our ancestors, for our queer and trans and non-binary ancestors who maybe in their lives never had a chance to practice the freedoms that we have, who never had a chance to be out, who never had a chance to be in relationships that felt liberatory and generative, our ancestors who never found their community, right? But who also, I deeply believed, were dreaming of a world where we, their descendants, could enjoy the freedoms that they never had access to. And I also remember all of our ancestors who have acted up, all of our ancestors who said no, who said no more policing, no more violence. They stood up. They organized, they created mutual beneficial kind of community organizations that help to help one another. They created the philosophies, the logic, the scholarship, like Audre Lorde, who I'm wearing on my sweatshirt. All our ancestors who gave us language to be ourselves, the ancestors whom we study and we quote, and we revere. I particularly think about Audre Lorde, James Baldwin, Marsha P. Johnson, for instance, and all of our queer scholars, in the Dharma world who are creating scholarship of inclusivity, as we move deeper into our study and translation of Dharma into the West. And also just want to again, just highlight those members, those folks in the world right now who are afraid to be themselves, who are afraid to come out, who will maybe never come out, right? I want to especially remember them because this is the expression of Dharma as compassion, and that the more out and proud I live, the more I realize that I am living on behalf of so many beings who may not have or feel as if they can make the choice to be open, as I am, right? So I like this candle. And I offer this light to you and your ancestors, to your communities, to your sanghas. I offer this light to all of our descendants because in this moment, our gathering, our practice together is creating the causes and conditions for a different future for our descendants to emerge into this world. That we all have a right to practice Dharma and the liberation that Dharma promises. And to remember the light right now. Remember our clarity, our love, our passion, our fierceness, our love. And that to remember that queerness is also being in solidarity with all beings who are experiencing oppression and marginalization and over surveillance and erasure and even genocide. As we used to sing growing up in my church, you are the light of the world. We are the light of the world. But lastly, I just want to thank our teachers and our mentors and our guides, and particularly my teachers who encouraged me to be out and proud, right? Who said that I had a right to be queer and sassy and to cut up and to talk shit. I'm very grateful, to my old school Tibetan masters who didn't know, never had Black queer students at all, but somehow found me and was like, we don't understand you, but you know what? You do you. And I'm so grateful for that, I don't know, that permission to be myself. I never felt policed or limited with my teachers, right? And I don't want, and I want to continue sharing that blessing with all those who study with me or who sit, with me in teachings. Right? So thank you. I have a quick story before I get more into the New Saints, but I remember when I started practicing Buddhism in my early 20s, and I was, my community was radical, queer, punk, um, fierce activists and organizers. And religion, spirituality wasn't a thing. So when I started transitioning into Dharma, people felt very hesitant, because they thought I was just going to turn into a monk and shave my head, which I did, by the way. But mostly they thought that I would somehow forget about the work of freedom and liberation. But the opposite happened. I got much more interested in freedom and liberation and organizing. But I remember a good friend of mine at the time just asked me, and she was like, what does Dharma say about queerness and gay people and gender? And I just kind of looked at her and I said, I don't actually care what it says about queerness, because I know queerness is liberating and queerness is who I am. And the Dharma says we have a right to be free, and that's all I'm interested in. And so from the very beginning, it never even, bothered me. It was never even something I've thought about in terms of queerness and Dharma, because if Dharma is about getting us free, and if queerness for me was about getting free, then those two expressions were in alignment, right? And that's something that I always have to remind folks too, that this is, to be who we truly are is liberation. right? To be able to choose our most authentic expressions is about getting free, and that's Dharma, you know. So thank you for this space as well. So I just want to just talk a little bit about the new saints. So many people are interested in this book, and again, the new saints is just it's a kind of a contemporary retelling of the Bodhisattva tradition, because looking at the world right now, I just felt like we needed to be reminded of the power of Dharma, but we needed to receive kind of the power, particularly of the Bodhisattva tradition, in a way that felt really fresh and direct and unique, in a way that really encompassed liberation and focused on liberation, social liberation, spiritual liberation. Um, Having been a co-writer for Radical Dharma, I know and understand and feel like that the integration of social liberation and ultimate liberation are the only ways forward, and that's the only way Dharma will be rooted in our communities, right? It's the only way Dharma will be able to cut through white supremacy and cisgender privilege and patriarchy and ageism and all of these things that I think have begun to influence Western expressions of Dharma, right? We have to remember that this is about getting free actually from the ways in which identity keeps us really, I would say, incarcerated in certain ways. For me, there has to be a fluidity in any identity location that I claim, and this is in the spirit of Dharma, to say that, yes, I am queer, but at the same time, I'm not, because my expression, my deepest, most authentic expression transcends identity. It transcends the relative. But in this moment, these are just one of the identities that emerge for me, right? So I'm not trying to bypass it. I'm not trying to ignore it. I'm trying to open to it, to embrace it, right? And to understand that in this opening, in this embracing of queerness in particular, that there is this experience of ultimate liberation, right? That everything is an illusion, right? And I can situate myself in queerness knowing that relatively this is an illusion, but ultimately who I am or what I am is an experience of emptiness and space and energy, right? And so I keep both of those, the relative and the ultimate identities, in balance, for me, in the same way that the Heart Sutra teaches us, right? That, form is emptiness, emptiness is form, and how both of these extreme teachings are brought together. So I am and I'm not, right? And in that kind of holding of this contradiction, there can be this kind of experience of freedom, fluidity, movement, openness, expansion, right? I can find joy in my queerness, not necessarily the trauma, the pain all the time, but there's so much joy, there's so much space, right? There's been, yes, so much struggle for so many of us to gather the resources that we need to be safe and happy and well. And there's so much gratitude, for me at least, that I have access to these resources to choose to be my truest and most authentic self, right? So in the New Saints, I bring all of this together, and not only do I talk about this framework of the New Saint, which is an expression of the Bodhisattva, I really frame this within my own personal experiences, right? And so when you get this book, I think this is probably the queerest Dharma book that you will ever read. I'm pretty sure. Because I finally got into a place where I'm not so ashamed to talk about the depth of queerness and who I am, from my body, to, you know, the expression of the erotic and my sexual expression, like as a queer cisgender man, right? And how all of this all of this for me is the only way that I understand how to be free. You know. So in the book, I have this kind of what I call the four yogas, and the four yogas really help us to understand, the work of liberation right now. And the four yogas are the yoga of dream, the yoga of clarity, the yoga of work, and the yoga of care. Right. I'll just briefly go through this too, just really briefly. When I talk about the yoga of dream, I'm talking about how do we imagine freedom, right? What is the liberated future that we're working towards? And again, this is a text rooted with an abolitionist struggle. For me, my abolitionist struggle is rooted with an American anti-slavery abolition, right? Which is basically saying that everyone deserves to be free and that any institution that prevents freedom has to be abolished, no matter what that institution or system is. So what does it mean to live a liberated future where our bodies and our relationships are no longer legislative content, or they're not, things that people are voting on, right? Like no one has a right to vote on who I choose to be in a relationship with, and who and how I choose to make decisions about my body. So I want a liberated future that transcends, other people's opinion of my body, particularly other people's opinion who are not in community with me and who do not love me. Right? To disrupt the ways in which other people's insecurities become weaponized against me, and my choice to live freely. So the liberated future, what kind of community are we dreaming about and working towards? And so the second yoga is the yoga of clarity. So this means I'm getting clear about what it is that I need to do. Like clarity for me being an expression of wisdom, right? So like I need to tell the truth about what's happening. I need to get clear about who I am and what I am, right? I need to get clear about my ethics. I need to get clear about the suffering that I struggle with. I have to get clear about my body, right? And I have to get clear about my commitment to helping others be free as well. The fourth yoga is the yoga of work. And that's when I figure out finally what it is that I'm supposed to be doing, and I do it. What does liberatory work actually look like? Not just in our practice, but on the ground, in our communities, in our relationship. How do we begin to abolish the ways in which shame acts as a policing agent within our expression of bodies and relationships? How can we begin to disrupt, policing? Because queerness is an antithesis to policing, right? And the ways in which patriarchy and so forth polices our expressions and our identities, right? So figuring out what your work is and just doing your work and coming back to your work over and over and over and over again, right? If your work seems easy, then it's probably not your work. If the work seems a little challenging, a little edgy, that's probably the direction you should be heading into, right? So again, for me, it's the remembering of our ancestors, right? Like Audre Lorde and so forth, like to remember the courage, the love that our queer and trans ancestors, right, offered to us. And how do we begin to take on like their work and continue their work, And so the last yoga is the yoga of care. And the yoga of care is really about how do I gather, or rather, how do I experience the care that I need to continue this work, right? How do I open to the caretaking of my community, right? And people and the care from people who love me. How do I offer that care back to others? Because we can't continue just doing this work of freedom without figuring out what self-care looks like, and community care and collective care, right? There's no way for us to get free if we're not opening to the resources that support us in continuing this work, right? And the streaming and getting clear. Right. And I think this is what our ancestors were doing as well. You know, this is our ancestors offered us dreams of what the world could be, and they helped us to get clear, and they showed us what our work was, right? But I think just as importantly, they showed us that like we deserve care. No matter who and what we are, we deserve care in the same way all beings deserve to be free, you know. Um, so the book is kind of just arranged around these four yogas, you know, and from there I go into just invoking different elements of queer community, from sexuality and the erotic um to the drag queens, to like to the disco, right, to just understanding that identity is fluid and open, and just really wanting us to like begin to return back to fluidity and expansion instead of the intense rigidity that I think many of our communities are experiencing. Of course, that rigidity comes from fear, it comes from exhaustion, it's trauma, right? It's looking to this really uncertain future right now that we're in and saying, you know what, I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to choose love. I'm going to choose care. I'm going to choose openness. I'm going to choose to tell the truth about who I am and what I do and how I choose to create community and family, right? This is a time, and I'll just kind of wrap up here, but this is a time where we have to remember the courage of our ancestors and the courage of our change makers, and re-evoke that energy, right? As people shut down and get more rigid, we have to explode, we have to expand, we have to blossom even more, because people have to remember and be reminded that there's still light in the world, that there's still potential, right? That this world isn't this closed reality where freedom isn't possible. Freedom is always possible. As long as there is dharma in a world system, there's always a path to liberation and freedom. And I think our community has to be at the forefront of reminding folks, you know, that we will always choose freedom and choose authenticity for ourselves, and for our communities. So I just, you know, kind of want to pause there if there are like any questions. I know we're probably right at time.